Welcome to the U Chicago Alumni Association Career Month webinar series. My name is Rachel Burkhan-Rommelfanger, and I work with the Alumni Career Development Team here at the University of Chicago in Hyde Park. I am delighted to welcome you to our penultimate webinar entitled Negotiate to Win, Strategies to Land the Offer or Raise You Deserve. Today's speaker is college alumna and parent of a recent graduate, Liz Colodny, who's graduated in '81. She's a career coach currently at Cornell. When I asked Liz what she wanted to be when she grew up as a child, she said that typical of her time, she absolutely had no idea, and she never thought that she was going to go to business school and end up as a career coach. It's my pleasure to hand the controls over to Liz.
Thank you so much, Rachel, and hello, fellow University of Chicago alumni. I can't tell you what an honor and pleasure it is to be here doing this webinar today. And as Rachel indicated, the fact that I am doing this is definite proof that careers can be extremely unpredictable. When I was in the college in the 70s, I absolutely had no clue. So what did that mean? It meant I took a degree in general studies in the humanities because I couldn't commit. And I understand that's now called interdisciplinary studies in the humanities. And I just want to say, because this is part of your negotiation, that in my case, and I'm sure in yours as well, my Chicago education has really served me well, particularly having been in humanities. And the fact that you've already earned this degree is a point of leverage for you because people around the world know and highly respect the Chicago brand. So please recognize that you already have a launching point for something to negotiate. So let me share just a tiny bit about my background that I think is relevant to this negotiation topic. First, as Rachel said, I did earn an MBA at Northwestern, which I was extremely ill prepared for, I have to say. I was a humanities undergrad. I was not well prepared in quantitative methods whatsoever. Nonetheless, I eked my way through my degree, including in finance and accounting and statistics. But after that, I knew I wasn't going to be in finance, and I embarked on a career in HR, mostly working in roles as a recruitment and staffing leader for large organizations, including places like Citibank and PepsiCo and a few others. I also worked for many years as an outplacement coach with people who were in transition. And in 2006, I set up my own consulting business, which became more and more focused on coaching. So now, today, as Rachel said, I'm on the full-time staff at Cornell University in the Johnson School of Management, where I support executive MBAs across North and Latin America. So I absolutely am totally aligned to my work, and I want to give you all hope that if you don't know what you want to do today, it's perfectly normal. I work with people every day who are not sure and clear, but that is all right. So I want to stress that my framework in approaching this topic is that of a practitioner and not as an academic. And right up front, as I indicated, I'm not quant. I'm not going to impress you with any fancy charts, graphs, or equations. So for those of you who are quant in the webinar crowd, I'm sorry, you may be disappointed here. But here are my goals in doing this webinar. I want to help you feel more confident and reduce the anxiety that you may have around negotiation. And I think a lot of the reason that people don't want to negotiate is they do feel fearful and anxious about it. I want to provide you with some proven strategies that you may not have thought about. And I also want to caution you about common pitfalls that can derail you and give you some ideas of where you can go to get more information and support beyond this webinar. So at this point, we're just going to do a very quick and dirty poll so we can see how many people in the crowd have negotiated recently, semi-recently, over the last 3 years. I'm sure some of you have, some of you haven't, and some of you may not know whether you negotiated. So I'm going to give a minute for Rachel to get some poll numbers going here, and we'll see what we got. And I will appreciate Rachel sharing that with us. In the meantime, while we're waiting for that, if you know you've come to this webinar with questions, you might want to jot them down because we'll have time at the end for Q&A. And if I haven't addressed something that's on your mind, I would ask that it be specifically related to the topic of negotiation, because we won't have time to address things that really fall outside of that topic. But please jot your questions down, because you can send your questions through the chat to Rachel.
All right, so we have our answers, and I can share them with everybody. So our attendees should be able to see this. Have you negotiated in the last 3 years? 49% said yes, they have. 47% said no, they have not negotiated within the last 3 years. And 3%, I'm not sure whether I've negotiated or not.
Okay, so we have a pretty even split community. That's pretty remarkable. I wouldn't necessarily have expected that outcome, but that's pretty amazing. So clearly we have a broad audience, some who've negotiated, some who haven't. I'm assuming you're on this webinar because you'd like to be able to do it better, or maybe you're just curious about what one presenter has to say about it. So one of the things that I would just like to say about this is, as you can see on the screen, the average person nowadays is going to change jobs a lot of times. And I think the trend for this, if you've just graduated college, you know that some of your friends who've graduated recently may already have made changes. So change is the new normal. I know that my parents were in their same careers, kind of moving up their respective ladders for 40 years. Well, we just don't see that anymore. So every time you make a change, there's an opportunity. I really want you to think of it as an opportunity to negotiate for yourself and to get the things that you really want to get, whatever they are. And everybody's going to define what they want differently. One thing I do want to stress is I know around the topic of negotiations, at the very core, people are often just thinking very narrowly about salary and bonus. And I really recommend that you think more broadly about your needs and your development, and not simply about getting promoted and getting more money. In fact, what's really interesting, when you look at data around why people leave jobs, compensation is only cited about 34% of the time. And other factors like advancement opportunities, challenge, and culture are much more commonly cited. So this is what we're going to be covering in this webinar: the negotiating mindset, some strategies for getting the most out of your negotiation, some common pitfalls, addressing somewhat briefly in-house negotiation, what's special about that, because a lot of what we'll talk about in making an external change is very similar. As I said, we want to have time to address your questions. I'm anticipating questions every time I've been on a webinar on this topic. There are always questions. And then to just provide you a couple of resources curated that I think will be helpful. Okay. So the negotiating mindset is really important. And if I leave you with nothing else after this webinar, I want you to have the belief that negotiating is a kosher activity and that you deserve to negotiate. The negotiation is expected in the process of seeking a new job or taking on a new role in a company or organization that you currently work in. What I would recommend you do is make a written list of what you want. What are your must-haves, your like-to-haves, and your like-to-avoid things. I'll just give you an example of somebody that I was coaching just this very week and why this was helpful. I was coaching a physician. He is in one of our executive MBA programs at Cornell, and he's currently employed, well employed, and not 100% unhappy where he is. But one of the things he wants to do is gain relationships with high-powered colleagues in his specialty. That's his must-have. But he also had a couple of things he wanted to avoid. He wanted to avoid being in a toxic culture and really avoid a longer, nastier commute. So he drafted a list of what was floating around in his head when we worked together, he was able to think about this even more deliberately and to isolate the most important job factors for him. So if you do, even if you don't work with a coach, but if you do as well, writing things down, I'm a huge advocate of, and I know as products of the University of Chicago, you're used to writing. So I would encourage you to get your thoughts down on paper. So you want to think of what you want, but here's a cautionary slide. I also want you to stay earthbound and not float off into Mars with things that are absolutely going to be perceived as crazy on the part of the other person you're negotiating with. So keep your feet on the ground and know what's reasonable. But back to positive mindset. You need to believe in yourself and that you have earned this opportunity, because if you don't, how in the world are you going to make the case to convince somebody else? Okay. And this could be more about opportunity, compensation, responsibility. So you need to frame this yourself in a very, very positive manner. And one way to do that is to think of positive things you've done in the past, obstacles you've overcome, and accomplishments that you've had in your recent job history. Okay, so how are you gonna actually be effective in your negotiation? First of all, you're definitely going to be doing research. You're going to be comprehensive, and I'm going to have slides on each of these. Wear the hat of the other party, manage the timing and place of your negotiation, and either close the deal or be ready to walk and keep moving forward. So what is research about? Well, just as if you were preparing for an interview, this is actually a common element to preparing for an interview. You're obviously going to do research on the organization or organizations that are your target places, and starting with job descriptions, reviewing their websites, and really thinking in terms of this place, what is my value proposition? I really need for you to consider how competitive the marketplace is. Even in a robust job market, you are still going to be competing with other highly qualified people. And you need to consider, what is my value proposition? What is my edge? What do I have on offer? You also need to do some information gathering about the market. I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with some of these websites. You should tune into your network, your personal network, your professional network, current and former employees of that organization, your target organizations, and headhunters can also be an excellent source. If you can get them on the line, often they only want to talk with you if you're 110% fit to a job they're recruiting for. But if you do have the opportunity to talk with them, they can be an excellent source of information about your market value. I think many of you are familiar with these websites that I'm citing, maybe not so much the Bureau of Labor Statistics, but another thing that I didn't put on the slide that I think could be very helpful to most people is going to your local library and asking for help from the business librarian. So there are a couple trends that really are favorable to job seekers that are going to help you with your negotiation. And the first one that I have here is one that many of you may not be familiar with. Many municipalities, states, and local governments have instituted salary bands. And I've put this link here because this link is refreshed real time, showing where there are bands. So for example, I live in New York State. The whole state, the city of New York, and the county that I live in all have banned employers asking about salary history. Now, why is this? Getting somebody's salary history and locking them in to it has a deterrent effect for women and minorities specifically. We know that women typically make maybe around 80% of what white male candidates make. When you remove getting salary history from the equation and move the negotiation into what do you want, the playing field is much more even. The other trend, so I would encourage you guys to check this link because it is real time. And right now, as of today, there are 11 states and 9 municipalities that are banning questioning around salary history. Another trend is salary transparency, and you can see various ways in which social media and entities like Glassdoor are including more information about salary. And LinkedIn has this new tool. I had actually not until this morning gone to it, but you can get to it by linkedin.com/salary and explore salaries for open roles that way. So these are 2 trends that are favorable to job seekers. All right, so being comprehensive. This is really, really important because I don't want you to be very narrow about what you're looking for when you make a job change. Obviously, salary and bonus are quite common, but these are just a few of the things, and you might even have experienced other things or negotiated for other things. Most of these things are on the table for negotiation. Some of them aren't going to be, like a 401k match policy or your insurance contribution. Those are going to be fixed. But a lot of these are negotiable. I'll give you one example. You see tuition reimbursement on this slide. I was coaching an executive MBA last year, very highly paid, multi-6-figure person who, very bright, very capable, very experienced in his field, did not actually realize that he could negotiate to have his tuition reimbursement to the tune of $75,000 negotiated into his new deal. And through working together, I mean, of course, I know this because I'm a practitioner. He put that on his list of things to get with the new employer, and lo and behold, $75,000. So obviously, you don't know what you don't know. But when you can consider this list, you can go to Glassdoor, see comments on it about people do make remarks about compensation and every which kind of thing. And through talking to people, what is common in this universe? Is working remotely a couple days a week common? Will I get a laptop? Do they pay for my phone? Yada, yada, yada. Okay, so think broadly. Another thing I really need you to do is to wear the hat of the other party. This, for obvious reasons, is my favorite slide. I can't resist doing this one more time. I know you could have said, or I could have said, wear the shoes or the boots of the other party, but I love the hat thing. This is really important. You're going to want to show empathy toward the other party and respect that they have constraints. They've got their own needs. Even thinking about if you went into a car dealer, most of us realize, I think if we've ever done this, that car salespeople have quotas every month, and they are going to want to do a deal, but they also have constraints. They have to make a certain amount of margin on each transaction that they've got. And if you go in and you're naive to the fact that they've got to make some money on the deal, your negotiation is going to fall flat. So you've got to recognize the other person has some needs and constraints as well. So regarding timing, first of all, as I indicated before, most people do not leave a job because of compensation. They leave a job for reasons that have to do with opportunity, fit, they're not challenged, it could be a boss issue. So focusing on the role and the organizational fit first is really important. And to the extent possible, to defer the compensation discussion until you can't. So what do I mean by that? Until you can't. You don't want to go in and be the first person to go in and say, I'm looking to make a job change, and here is what I'm looking to earn. First of all, having a long experience in recruitment, if somebody came in to me and immediately told me that compensation was their first driver, it would be a complete turnoff, because it's my job as somebody helping to acquire talent for an organization to get a long-term fit, and somebody really that's long-term fit. I don't want to build in turnover. So when I say until you can't, when you get pressed to give that number, and I know this is going to make people upset to hear this, but when you get pressed to state what is your salary requirement and you need to expect that this is going to happen, you've got a couple of choices. You can try and completely deflect on it and say, I really don't want to talk about that right now, and just keep your mouth closed from that point of view. That's not going to fly in most cases. Or a couple of alternatives. You can say, I really will be happy to talk about that topic, but I want to really ensure that we have a good match here first. Would it be okay with you if we defer that until we're a little further down the path? Alternatively, from your research, you can get a sense of what is a reasonable range for the kind of work that you do, the industry you're in, and your geography. And you can develop a range and say something like, from the companies that I've been exploring in my recent job search, it strikes me that the range for my target job is between X and Y. And you can say further, is this job falling in that range? So you can put it a little bit on them. And I think you want to make your top of your range as high as, your ideal. And one thing to be aware of, as soon as you put that bottom number down, that recruiter is going to hear that bottom number and is going to probably think that they can get you for that number. So be very, very cautious what you put out there, because it will be sticky. They will take notes on it. Okay. And also just a note about that further. If you're dealing with a headhunter, they're going to eke it out of you probably in about the first 10 seconds of your phone call. Because they need to know they're representing their client. They don't want to waste their client's time presenting candidates who the client cannot pay or is not willing to pay that amount of money. Okay, so managing place is also important. I would encourage you, on the left side, what you see here is some guy who's randomly, like on the street, picked up his phone and is attempting to have a work conversation. I definitely would not recommend negotiating on the phone, or for that matter, having an interview on the phone. You really need to manage the setting very carefully. Make sure it's quiet, appropriate. You can have your notes in front of you, etc. To the extent possible, it's really going to be a good idea to negotiate face-to-face. And that may not always be possible these days. The recruiter who's managing the job that you're interested in may be in a different city or even a different country from where you sit. But there's a really strong likelihood these days that you're going to have video capability. And so in that way, even though it's not in the same room, it would still be face-to-face. So mind your body language, your tone of voice, and try to maintain eye contact, and remind yourself that you deserve this opportunity. Whatever it takes to keep you calm, take deep breaths, whatever it takes to make you feel relaxed and confident. So we want to avoid some common pitfalls. And again, as a practitioner, my colleagues and I, and as a coach and as a recruiting manager, see a lot of things that people do that do not advance their cause. One, and I just had a case like this, a guy who was seeking to move to a consulting firm here in New York. An offer, it was a long recruiting process. He wanted this job, and he had stated a range of what he was looking for, so he hadn't screwed anything up in that regard. But when the offer finally came down, he really wasn't sure that he wanted to negotiate. He wasn't sure that he saw an opportunity to negotiate. So again, this goes to the mindset of just knowing that every time you're making a change, it is an opportunity to negotiate. What's the worst that can happen? Really, the worst that can happen is you're gonna land at the original spot. So it's being willing to take that risk, hopefully get the fear out, and recognize that it is an opportunity. So another thing that people might be tempted to do, let's say, and this guy actually was tempted to do it in the case that I'm sharing with you, is he was inclined to sort of say yes on the spot, except that he wasn't really a risk taker. So he called and we had several conversations. But do not negotiate at the point of an offer. Give yourself some time. It's extremely acceptable and normal to say I'd like 24, 48, maybe even 36 hours, the weekend, whatever, to consider the offer. And also get it in writing. Now, what's likely going to happen is a verbal offer is going to come first. That wouldn't be at all surprising. But you do eventually want to get the offer in writing. And yes, you can negotiate a verbal offer. Also, don't make unsubstantiated requests that sound crazy. Again, this is Earth versus Mars. You need to make the case for why a particular request, be it vacation time, hours off, a certain compensation, whatever, makes sense, is rational, is fact-based. Another pitfall is negotiating one thing at a time. So let's say, I'm ready to take this job if I get 3 weeks of vacation. And the recruiting manager goes back and says, okay, I'll see if I, was originally 2, I'll see if I can get you another week. They come back, they say, okay, good news, I got you 3 weeks. And then you say, oh, okay, well, now I'm really not that comfortable with title. So I now need to discuss that it was director and I need to be a senior director. So this is really just going to do nothing but irritate the other party if you keep bringing things back. Another thing is any kind of entitlement. I just want to warn you throughout the process. Seeming entitled to anything and not being gracious and expressing gratitude is not going to help your cause. So do not use language such as I want or I need. You're in a we or us situation. Okay, we already talked about managing the place. I do not recommend that you negotiate whatever you want through email or in a poor setting. And when you are negotiating, it is actually best to have more than one thing to negotiate, because you'll have a more effective negotiation on money if it isn't the first thing that you bring up. So bring up an easy thing first that somebody is more likely to agree to, and then save the harder thing for either the second or third item that you bring up. Okay, so some of this is recapping things that we already talked about a little bit. From the beginning, knowing your values and your must-haves in a negotiation. You really need to know what are your anchors. Reinforce the fit and interest. That's also just basic to good interviewing and landing a job. Acting in a nice, collegial, cooperative manner, and I mean with everybody, not just with the hiring manager and the recruiting manager, but be very careful to be on your best behavior with all administrative staff as well. You want to seem like a nice person, because being perceived as nice and kind is going to further your negotiation interests. We talked about start with easier to get and we and us language versus I language, recognizing that the other party has constraints. And that could include, for example, very common internal equity. Say I'm recruiting for a 5th person on a team that already has 4 people, and they all are in some salary range. And if I hire somebody, even if they have additional skills, whose comp is way out of line to the team I already have, I'm going to have to make the assumption that those 4 people, one way or another, are going to get a hold of that information, and then I'm going to build in turnover. So there just are realities like that, okay? Prepare for more than one round of negotiations. Very common, I would say 2 iterations is extremely common to get to a final win-win on both sides. Showing appreciation, and this is really important, even if it doesn't end up in an offer, even if you get rejected, and you decide to walk away, because people have very, very long memories. And what assists them in their memories is systems where people actually enter notes about interactions and candidates. So even if that person leaves the organization, somebody else who picks up on you as a candidate may see notes about how you behaved. And really recognize that no, not now is often not yet. There could be a job freeze, for example. An internal candidate could get picked for the moment, but then another headcount comes up. So often no is not yet, and something could still come back alive. So this is a colleague of mine at Cornell University, Kathleen O'Connor, has this really useful acronym called SHIFT, okay? And most of this is gonna look very intuitive. Hearing the other side, the relationship part, framing the negotiation, and being open about solutions. I want to address two of these in particular. Separating interests from positions is something that I've only recently started to learn about, but I think it's extremely, extremely useful. So what's an example of that? So an example of an interest versus a position is, let's say you're a parent and you've got a kid, and your kid is into sports, and they play soccer twice a week after school at 3:30 on the school field. So as a parent, it's your interest to at least occasionally attend your kids' games. Alternatively, as a position, if I were negotiating a position, I might say, this would be hard line and not recommended, I need to leave work every Tuesday and Thursday at 2:30. That would be a position. If you express it as an interest, a couple things are likely to happen. One is, as another human being and possibly as another parent who has kids who do sports, I might feel like what your interest is really resonates to me, and I would be sympathetic to it. Another thing is, if I really know what your interest is, okay, you want to attend your kids' soccer games, well, maybe there's a creative workaround, and this goes to the creative thinking about solutions. Maybe if as a flexible environment, which not everyone is, we could say, okay, totally respectful, I get that's really important to you. Would you be willing, I'm speaking from the employer point of view, to put in time in the evenings at home after these games are over, or come in early in the morning? And this way, instead of just asking me if you can leave at 2:30 twice a week, we can actually come to an accommodation on both sides that promotes the interest that you're trying to accomplish, but also meets my needs of your being on the job a certain period of time. Okay, so what we know for women, and I do need to address this, is that studies show, again, this is from Kathleen O'Connor, that if women are very me, and self-interested, and they behave exactly the same way as men do, they actually get dinged for it. So just a caution that women need to be very sensitive to take a communal approach in their negotiations and really be more expressive, about the benefits to the other party. And we just know it's evidence-based that this is going to help women in their negotiations. So I really think it's important, going back to your mental preparedness and knowing your values, that you be prepared to walk away if the situation does not meet your core needs. It may not meet all your nice to haves, but if it doesn't meet your core needs, it's really important that you have the self-respect and the courage to walk away and know that something else good will come down the line if you work for it. Okay, and finally, if it doesn't work out, and if it's a rejection at the end of the day because your needs couldn't be accommodated or it just wasn't a fit, don't take it personally. And this may seem silly to put up here, but I can tell you, working with hundreds and hundreds of people, that it is very natural and normative to take it personally when you get a rejection, or even if it isn't a rejection, if you can't come to a positive conclusion. But it isn't personal, it's just business. So you need to be able to move forward. So at this point, we're going to do another poll, which pertains to moving in your current organization as opposed to targeting a new organization. Okay, so just to get a sense of how many of you, we were evenly split on who's negotiated recently and who hasn't. How many people plan to move to a different role in their current organization, and how many people have no plan to move to a different role in their current organization? So I know when Rachel has tallied that up, she will share that with us, and hopefully you guys are jotting down some questions. Okay.
And everyone should be able to see that we do have the answers to our poll. 43% said yes, I'm planning to move into a different role in my current organization, and 57% said no, I'm not planning to move to a different role.
All right, so we're not so evenly split now, but still a significant number of people do plan to make an inroad in their current organization. And I'm making the leap that the 50% who said no are thinking about a job change one way or the other. Okay, so with respect to an internal negotiation and salary review, this is actually what you want to be. You want to be all positive. Again, the mindset, sunshine, light, and success. All good news, no bad news here. And again, as I said in the beginning, I do believe that this is really, really important, that you think broadly about your development and not just compensation and not just upward moves, not just promotional moves. These days, it's extremely common for people to move laterally in their organization because it's developmental. It's addressing maybe skill gaps that you don't present with today, but it may not be a money change, it may not be a title change. So think broadly about your development, remembering those reasons that people change jobs, that they are often because of the ability to make contributions and stretch their wings, and not so much about the comp. So think broadly about what is on offer in your current organization, not just the comp. Here's what's really different when it's internal versus making a move externally is all organizations. I think every organization that has more than one person in it has politics. And hopefully you think about the politics that are going on in your organization, because if you're deaf to them, it certainly isn't going to help you. You need to really be checking the tea leaves on who's got the power to make moves, what's going on, is there business growth, what's happening, and just kind of soaking in what's going on politically. If you don't, it's definitely not going to help you in a negotiation. Again, just like the external, recognizing internal constraints, the internal equity thing comes up frequently. Business performance is huge. If you're in a business unit or a company that is underperforming at the moment, that may well be a constraint. And there may be other, let's say you're in an organization that has onshore and offshore businesses. Maybe your business onshore isn't doing so well. Maybe there are opportunities to work offshore. There are also very frequently, at least in large organizations, time and job policies. So it wouldn't be uncommon that you must stay in your current role a year before you can post for another job. So know the lay of the land in your organization. What are the constraints? Sometimes you might be able to bust through them if you're a rock star. Sometimes, you're going to rise like cream to the top, but I wouldn't necessarily expect it in every case. So this is really important. Understanding what causes moves to happen is they are based on your performance, demonstrated performance. So if you're on the outside, in the first case, people are going to try and get how have you performed. They're going to ask you behavioral questions when they're interviewing you. On the inside of the organization, you may have similar behavior-based interviews, but people are also going to have access to your managers, other people who've seen how you operate, what your results have been. So you need to demonstrate your value, your worth, to be able to move even laterally and not just upward. And this is really important and not intuitive to people. I think a lot of people would think the time to ask for a promotional move or any move is at the time of your performance discussion. Not so. Why not so? Not so because very frequently salary budgets and business budgets are done before these performance reviews are done. And I would advocate that the best time to have a discussion like this is when you've accomplished your whole set of deliverables for the year or the quarter, or you've just knocked the socks off of some initiative that you have led. When you have a lot of really good news to share, I would say is the best time to do your ask, not at the time of your salary review. Okay, so a few things to consider on these moves. Do you have sponsors? Is there somebody in the organization who, when they know there's an opening coming up, is actually going to recommend your name be put in the hat for that slot? That's a sponsor as opposed to a mentor. A mentor might be somebody that you get information on how do you operate, best practices, you have questions, but a sponsor is actually somebody who's going to be putting your name forward. Can you negotiate a brand new role? Now, knowing the inside of the organization, I have seen it be the case where somebody has an idea for they see a gap, they see an opportunity. And even if something isn't on the org chart today, they go and they have the confidence and the analytical backup to go and propose that this could really make sense for our business. This could be a new line of business, a new revenue stream, a new whatever that doesn't exist today. And if you're a good influencer and you've got your ducks in order, you might be able to get a new role. Another thing to really consider internally is whether a successor is in place. So if you're leading a team and you haven't groomed a successor, guess what? That's a problem. If I'm your manager and you are key to me and I have nobody immediately to replace you and I may have to go out and recruit somebody new, that's on me. So I would say paying attention to the succession of yourself and your job is absolutely a key element to being able to move out of that role. So the caution, excuse me, I'm going to take a sip of tea here. So things to be cautious about. As I've said before, but I can't say it too much, entitlement. Having any sense of entitlement that you deserve this or that, especially in a competitive way. You deserve it over somebody else. Of course, there could be a case to be made, but appearing entitled is not generally going to help make your case. Unproven performance. Let's say you've been in a role and there's been upheaval organizationally, and for whatever reason, you had deliverables, they've been disrupted, and you don't have a lot to talk about. I know this happens frequently because I see people's resumes where they really struggle to have accomplishment bullets. So if you think of your resume and you don't have a lot of accomplishment bullets to put on it, that's going to signify that your performance is unproven, and that would be not a good time to go seek even a lateral opportunity most of the time. People are always going to want to see that you have added value. And lacking key relationships. Again, this goes to the sensitivity to politics, the likability factor. Being considered a good guy or good gal is absolutely critical. Okay, so I'm going to semi-leave you with this thought from Deepak Malhotra, and you'll see that there is a link to a YouTube video that he has done. He's a professor at Harvard Business School who's a guru on negotiation. And there will come a time when the only leverage you have in a negotiation is your credibility. It will be the only reason they agree to sit down with you or take the risk you're asking them to take. On that day, you'll be glad you never sacrificed your reputation for short-term gains. So I want to stress to you that your reputation, your brand, and your relationships are over the long term. And this nice factor and being perceived as an adult human being who has reasonable expectations that are based on performance and based on research and based on integrity is really going to serve you over the long term. So what are some key takeaways? And we're getting to the point where we'll have a time for some questions. The market is competitive out there, even in a robust market. So you need to know, what is your value proposition? You need to prepare mentally and have data to have a successful negotiation. You want to highlight your value. What is my value to this organization, this team, this company? And you want to defer the real negotiation as to the end. Your maximum leverage is at the point of an offer. You want to negotiate face-to-face, not over your cell phone, not on the street, and certainly not through email. And internally and externally, you want to develop relationships and sponsors who are going to be there to promote you, who've seen your work, have faith in you, and will nominate you at the appropriate time. And as we just talked about, you need to mind your reputation all the time. So after the webinar, I strongly suggest that you look at this Deepak Malhotra YouTube. I think it's close to an hour long, but well worth the time negotiating your offer, and potentially either take out of the library or purchase Secrets of Power Salary Negotiating by Roger Dawson. And additionally, there is content on the U Chicago Career website. And if you still need additional resources or support in a negotiation, by all means, I recommend you consider a coach. There is a list of coaches on the alumni website, but you may know other coaches as well. What I have found is that people who have a coach covering their back when they're in a negotiation, particularly from early on, always do better. I really can always say always. Maybe not for every element, but it so boosts people's confidence in their organization around their ask that they're invariably going to do better. So at this point, I'm happy to entertain questions for the time we have remaining. And I'm assuming, Rachel, that you may have gathered a couple.
Yeah, I want to kind of combine a couple questions here for the first one. Folks are asking about that continuous question of, when should they reveal their salary requirements? So sort of a two-parter is, one is, what do I do with the online application systems? How do I fill out a salary requirement there? And also, what do I do when the job is advertised with a salary range and list a very clear salary number? Do I ignore it? Do I select the top number? So if you could answer those two together.
Okay, so let me take online application first. This is a very common one. So depending on the applicant tracking software that an organization has and customizes, and there are many out there and they are able to customize them, they may have a field in there that you are required to fill in on your salary expectation. And there's a couple ways to handle that. One is you can attempt to write a word in if it will allow you to put a word in, such as negotiable or flexible. If it doesn't allow that and you have to put something numeric in the field, you can attempt to just put the number 1 and see if it will accept that. If that's not taken by the system, then what I would really recommend is you reflect on what is the number you really want to have. Is it earthly? Is it reasonable? Are you likely to get it based on your research? Because remember, you've done research and you know the range that you should be in. And probably I would recommend putting something near the top of the range. If you're beyond the range, they depending on the recruiter and the constraints in that organization, you may not be selected. If you fall slightly out of the range, you may be selected. With respect to this advertisement question, if a job is advertised, let's say a range of $50,000 to $60,000, should you respect the range? Well, I would say I would generally respect a range that's put out there. Once it's in the public domain, they're probably pretty serious that is the range. If you're maybe 10% over it or 15%, maybe it's worth a shot. But I think I wouldn't have a huge expectation that they're going to go much outside of a published range.
When you were talking about things that we can negotiate on, you mentioned organizational structure. Could you explain how you might negotiate around a topic like the structure of an organization?
Okay, well, clearly you're not going to completely rewrite an org chart, but let's say you're in a senior level job and there's an opportunity to divvy up the responsibilities maybe across peers. Maybe there are 3 peers at your level that report to the same person, but you have some special expertise where you think something should come under your purview and belong to your team. You could propose an alternative structure to the way it is structured. Now, obviously, context is going to hugely matter. You're not going to have a lot of leverage on that, but you may have some leverage on that.
Could you provide an example of how one might take a communal approach to negotiation that you suggested is better for women?
Yeah, a communal approach just means really super recognizing the interests of the other party as opposed to your own interests. So just to be really all-encompassing, the us, the we. This is going to serve us as a team if we do X. Taking the broader view, not the you, not the I, but the we.
Wonderful. How might you convince someone in the negotiation to take a risk on you if, say, you don't have a sponsor?
Well, I would go back to the slide that talks about performance. In an ideal world, it would be great to have 1 or more sponsors. But if you don't, I would say job fit and being able to demonstrate your value through previous performance. I think most of you all know about behavioral interviewing, where you provide examples of what you've done. And although this isn't an interviewing talk, I would say be mindful and use the mnemonic challenge, action, result, CAR. So what have you faced? What have you done about it? You and your team, if you lead a team, and what have the results been? That's the magic formula for showing what your value is. So even barring a sponsor, you're still going to have to demonstrate that you've added value.
When you're looking to move into a new organization and maybe you're lacking some of the behind the scenes information that could help you in negotiating, how can you figure out what are the real constraints that the other party has? One person says they're looking at nonprofit organizations where they're very clear, we can't negotiate on vacation salary or benefits. And so what other things might they be able to negotiate on?
Well, clearly nonprofits are a case where salaries are not going to be what they are in the private sector. That still doesn't mean you can't negotiate. I've worked with many people who work in nonprofits, mission-driven organizations where they've gone through the same process. So I really don't think there's much difference. There may be things like iPhones and whatnot that are more customary in a for-profit organization. But I think you have to do your research talking with current and former employees of that organization and maybe analogous organizations to uncover what is customary.
And finally, Liz, I just want to ask you, like, what if I've disclosed too much, or I might have undersold myself? How might I come back in that negotiation situation?
Okay, so I'm not sure in this case what you mean by disclose too much. I'm thinking maybe too early. Shall I interpret that as too much meaning too early?
Yes.
Okay, so you've put your cards out on the table more prematurely. You know, a better practice would have been to withhold it. So I think in that particular case, it's really paying attention to, is the job what it was presented to be? Maybe as you get into discussions, it's actually larger, and you could come back and make the case, well, the job actually is larger than what was written about it or what I really thought it was. And therefore, I think an adjustment is appropriate to be talking about here. And the other thing is, if you feel like you've gotten stuck on salary, they heard your low number, it's likely, let's say it's $50,000, they heard your 50 early on, you know, it's going to be hard to move them off that. You don't think you can make a case for enlarging the job, then what you could do is advocate for an early review. That's a tactic I've seen done many times. So instead of an annual review, you move for a 6-month review. There also could be on that list of things that are negotiable other ways to do it. Maybe it won't be on salary, but maybe it could be on a sign-on bonus. Sign-ons are incredibly common. What I would say is, if you're taking the comprehensive view and you know what you want your whole package to be, is to give the other party the flexibility to come up with creative ways to address your need. So they're not boxed into just one solution, that it's salary. Okay, so maybe your total comp, your total benefits, your total everything, your vacation, time off, whatever's important to you, and it really varies by person, is maybe there's some flexibility there. But I would say advocating for an early review is one I've seen many times.
Thank you. So we're at 12:59. And so Liz, I would just ask, do you have like one sentence that could summarize the most important takeaway from your talk today?
I think the one most important takeaway is to believe that it is perfectly acceptable and accepted to negotiate an offer, and you really have nothing to lose to do it, and to believe in yourself to the point where you're comfortable with it. And that may take practice, but there's nothing wrong with negotiation, and I think you should go for it. Those are my final words.
Thank you. Thank you, Liz, for sharing these strategies for getting the most out of your negotiation and the pitfalls we should avoid. I'm sure we could talk about this for a long time. And I want to thank everyone who came to this presentation today. Our career month is ending tomorrow with a presentation on empathy. I encourage you to sign up for that if you're interested, or come back in December. We're going to have a webinar on December 11th for setting goals for 2019 and looking back at 2018 to put your best foot forward. I encourage that one to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us. Take care and have a great rest of your day.